The second part of our little primer on World History 2, we're going to be dealing with a lot of the political sort of backdrops, especially also the religious backdrops of what is going on here in the 16th century, talking about particularly the causes and reactions to absolutism in Europe and how that is going to influence governments first in Europe and then eventually here in the New World, and then from the New World on beyond into what we often refer to as the Far East. So we got to talk about religion, and we got to talk about the two examples, or maybe the example and the counterexample of absolutism in Europe. We're going to see that the relative peace and calm of the 14th and the 15th centuries are going to be shattered here in the 17th century. A number of wars and revolutions are going to dominate the European continent, and they're also coupled with concomitant economic failures. And some of them are directly related to what we had talked about with European colonization. On the one hand, trade with the Americas had netted, initially the Spanish, but also everybody, this huge hoard of gold and silver. Well, they took to minting it, they took to using it, and that did exactly what happens when you start printing up a whole bunch of money, and that's inflation. You've got massive inflation. It's going to wreck a lot of these European economies because gold and silver, which had been a lot more precious and harder to get, now is a lot easier to get, and so that really begins to destabilize prices in markets, goods that are available, and so there's a lot of economic tumult as a result of that, right? So when you look at the slide that begins to take place here in the 17th century, this is going to cause a great deal of trickle-down effect on a lot of these populations, all right? People live under a great deal of uncertainty at this point in terms of politics, in terms of religion, in terms of their economics, and they're changing roles here in society, all right? Now, a good example of this, and we don't have time to talk about all of these, but a good example of this is the witch hunt craze of the 1600s. And this is always exciting, and students like to talk about this because, oh, it's witches, it's the occult, and they're speaking in tongues, and they get set on fire, and stuff like that. And so there's that. If you're interested in, sort of metaphysical approaches to witchcraft. But we're going to be looking at things here on the temporal plane for the witch hunt craze, and that is the socio-political side of what's going on. So there is some fun stuff, if you're interested in that kind of thing. There are women writhing on the floor under the possessions of demons and devils and whatnot, and they're being tortured and inquisited and stuff like that. And so this is typically what you're going to see ever increasingly. The reason that it's called a witch hunt, not a warlock hunt or wizard hunt. I'm not exactly sure what the male version of male witches, maybe. I don't know. They're women, and these are women that also, generally speaking, sort of break the rules of society. And so this gives you an idea of the disquiet that's going on here in society. And this is a woman, she's being suspended over the fire, soles of her feet being burned until she confesses of being a witch. But one of the major ways to deal with this was the mass hanging, right? You know, hang these witches in large rows. And then there's always the burning alive, right? The old-fashioned witch barbecue was a pretty good way to deal with this. Now again, divorcing ourselves from the metaphysical aspect of this, this denotes people who they're nervous about society. They're nervous about what's going on. There's something that they can't quite grasp, and so they're going to start pointing the finger and start blaming what they see in society around them. And in a lot of ways, as quickly as it started, it began to fade away. The United Americans, we didn't get into this until 1692. In the 1690s, about 50 years kind of too late. We kind of missed out on this. But, American society was a little bit behind, right? Now, a more concrete example here is the 30 Years' War, to give you an idea of the instability here in society. You had a number of religious wars in the 1500s that were really just the pre-rumblings of the major earthquake, and that's going to take place here between 1618 and 1648. And this is going to entangle the 30 Years' War. This is going to entangle both religion and politics. This is going to seem like a very straightforward kind of affair if you just look at the surface of what's going on. You say, oh, well, you had Protestants, and they followed Martin Luther and Zwingli and Calvin and guys like that, and then you got the Catholics, and they follow the Pope, and they hate each other, and so they kill each other, and then there you go. No, it's actually a lot more complicated than that, all right? What's going to happen here is, this is all going to begin in 1618 by a revolution of a number of Bohemian Protestant princes, all right? So they're part of the Habsburg Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and they are going to rebel against him. Now, in part, is this because they're Protestant and the Habsburg monarch Ferdinand is a Catholic? Yes. There's a religious dimension to that. Is it also because they're Bohemian, they speak Czech, and Ferdinand is German, speaks German? Yes. That's what's going to happen here. So on the one hand, Ferdinand is their monarch, all right? But he also has another hat, literally, a crown, that he wears, and that is, he is the Holy Roman Emperor. So essentially all of Germany, parts of the non-German parts of the Eastern Empire, and then also even on the way down into northern Italy, is all part of the Holy Roman Empire at this point. And Ferdinand was its emperor. So he is, instead of just mustering his own sort of personal forces, he is going to turn around and call, okay, the entire Holy Roman Empire has to send forces to help crush these guys. Well, these Catholics that are throughout the empire, they do. They send these forces, and they go in, they're going to conquer Bohemia, and they figure, well, while we're at it, we can't allow these Protestant guys to establish any kind of precedent that you can rebel against what they viewed as the legitimate Catholic authority. And so they're going to go on a spree, and they're going to go into Holland, and they're going to go into Western Germany, and the German Baltic ports, and they're going to start smashing up all of these Protestant strongholds along the way. So, very early on, Ferdinand is really successful. He's really at the height of his power, and this really alarmed, though, a lot of the German, especially Protestant princes, but all of these German princes who really don't like a strong sort of central government figure. They kind of like being off on their own, semi-autonomous. Yeah, Ferdinand is our emperor, he's over the top of all of us, but really we kind of like to do our own thing. And so they are not going to be in favor of this for both religious but also political reasons. And in 1629, though, Ferdinand is sort of feeling his oats. He's feeling like he's kind of on top of the world, and he declares that Protestantism, anything other than Catholic Christianity, is illegal. You can't be a Protestant. It's not cool. You've got to give credence to the Roman Church. The Roman Catholic Church is the only legitimate church, and so that's how this is going to be. Now, one of the things that you'll notice as we go through the class is we're going to look at a lot of different maps from a lot of different places, and they're going to be exceedingly confusing. I'm sorry. Blame the people who live there for not living in nice, orderly boxes that would be easy to keep track of. So this map gives you a pretty good idea of what we're talking about here. The green is the majority Catholic areas, and no, it's not all in one spot. And then the yellows and the purples are the Protestant spots, particularly Lutherans and Calvinists specifically. But this is where these are going to be, and you'll notice that they're all intermixed with each other. This is going to be a source of massive confusion as we go forward here as well. This is a zoomed-in map to give you an idea of kind of how much more broken down this is. This one, though, is a political map of these overlapping areas of who controls what. It was not uncommon at this point to have governments where you've got 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 islands of areas under your control that they don't connect with each other. So for those of you that today are kind of bothered by the fact that, well, you know, Alaska doesn't actually touch the rest of the United States, it kind of bugs me, you know. At this point, it would drive you absolutely batty then, because there were a lot of places that didn't touch each other, and they were all technically still part of the same government. So that's going to be a source for confusion as well. This is 1629. This is Ferdinand. He's riding his horse, and he has trampled these Protestant forces. And of course, you'll notice that above him, the throngs of heaven, they seem to be pretty cool with this. But I like the fact that the artist has left in the dark clouds and the thunder and the lightning of what is going on, because we're going to see that this isn't the end of what's going to take place. It isn't Ferdinand completely over the tops of these people. What's going to happen is you're going to get an intervention. This is going to be this brief little window where Sweden is a world power, or at least a continental power, in Europe. And the reason for this is not because of some major technological advancement or Sweden's discovery of an overseas colony or massive population explosion or anything like that. No, Sweden is going to go the Sparta route, which is, for a while, it is going to have one of the world's best armies. It is going to have one of the world's best battlefield commanders, actually a series of battlefield commanders. And the Swedish monarch at this point is a guy named Gustavus Adolphus. Not only is he the king, but he's also a great general. And whenever you see that in history, somebody who is the top political leader and is also the top great military figure, you always get spectacular results. Whether you're talking about Alexander the Great, whether you're talking about Sun Tzu, whether you're talking about Genghis Khan, you always get spectacular results. They may not be the most morally upstanding results, but they are always going to be important, right? Well, Gustavus Adolphus, one, he's Swedish, he's not German, but he's Protestant. And he sees what's going on here in Germany, just across the Baltic Sea from Sweden. He says, this is not right. This is not right. Ferdinand sort of crushing these Protestants. And so he decides to take his army by ship, and they're going to intervene directly in the war. All right? Well, Adolphus is going to do what Adolphus does best, and that's kick butt. All right? He's going to come in, and he's going to clear out most of northern Germany of Catholic forces and make it safe to be Protestant again. And it looks like he's going to move on and actually sort of knock out the Catholic government, possibly completely. But at the Battle of White Mountain here in South Germany, Adolphus is going to be killed. He's going to be killed in battle, and that then basically means, okay, the Swedish contingent, well, that's it. Our guy's dead. We got to, take his body back to Sweden. We're going to go home. He was the reason we were here. He wanted to fight, not the rest of us so much. Okay, and so they're going to leave. All right. This is going to leave things in essentially kind of a stalemate position, or at least at a fulcrum kind of position, where Catholic forces have been pushed back, Protestant forces have been kind of decimated, so they're not necessarily strong enough to glom onto the momentum that was created by the Protestant victories thanks to Gustavus Adolphus. We're going to have now another external intervention into this situation, and that's going to be the French. So this looks like it's going to be a pretty obvious kind of thing, right? The Holy Roman Empire, or the Holy Roman Emperor, he's Catholic, and then the Protestants are, well, they're Protestant, right? And the French are Catholic, so the Catholic French are going to come in on the side of the Catholic Holy Roman Empire, right? You'd be wrong. No. See, France is not thinking religiously. France is thinking nationalistically, right? The French monarchy is looking at this and they're saying, hey, look, the Germans to our age are really beating the stuffing out of themselves. This is a great opportunity for us to move in while they're weak and get what we want from this situation. And that's exactly what's going to take place here. Spain had been getting involved with this as well. They're going to drive the Spanish forces out of control of the Netherlands, and they're going to defeat the Holy Roman Empire's forces in southern Germany. So by the time we get to 1648, this has been going on for 30 years. Okay, this was a long, destructive war. And finally in 1648, everybody is really kind of out of gas. Right? Nobody wants to die anymore for this. And we're going to see that they're going to meet in Westphalia here in Germany, and they're going to concoct a peace treaty, all right? The Peace of Westphalia in 1648. This is what we're going to talk about. And it's going to end that conflict, all right? It's going to end 30 Years' War. And it's going to have a number of important outgrowths. One, it's going to guarantee the freedom of religion in Germany. You want to be a Protestant? Cool. You want to be a Catholic? Cool. Just please stop killing each other, all right? France is going to move into this position where now it is the #1 power in Europe. France had only been involved during the latter phases of the war. It had not suffered the massive casualties that Germany is going to face. The Holy Roman Empire had sort of almost self-destructed. Germany itself is absolutely devastated. The Holy Roman Empire was almost wholly given over politically to local power. The emperor himself is going to lose a lot of power, a lot of control. As a result of the fact that really he's kind of perceived to be the loser of the war. But when you get down to the local level, when you get out of sort of the halls of power and say, well, politically this guy's weak, politically this guy's strong, when you get down to the local level, 25% or so of the German population is dead as a result of that. Over this 35-year period, this is an insane amount of casualties. These are people that are just slaughtered in droves with this. So this is Gustavus Adolphus. This is his intervention. He's got his Swedish forces, and they're praying before the battle. You got these guys that are on foot, and they get down on a knee, and he's on his horse, and they're going to look up to God for inspiration before they go into battle. But eventually, as you're going to see, Gustavus Adolphus is killed. He's killed in the fighting, and this is his funeral procession being brought back to Sweden, and of course that means that his army has left the field of battle as well. These are some imperial forces that are overlooking this town of Protestants, and they're bombarding it. They're just going to blow it away. And this is how you get into these places. Is you bomb it with your cannons, and you create a breach in the wall, and you rush in. And what do you do when you rush in and take these places over? Well, you start killing people left and right. Now, it shouldn't surprise you that when an enemy army is approaching your area, you might give some careful consideration to getting the heck out of there. Right? That's not a new phenomenon in human history. It's in fact as old as, well, physical violence. Right? And so what you see is a lot of these people, whether they're Catholics in the face of a Protestant army or Protestants in the face of the Catholic army, they're going to try to get away from these invading forces so that if their town is captured, that they're not going to be slaughtered. This picture depicts one of these instances where this column of refugees is in fact intercepted by a cavalry patrol of the opposing forces. And they're being killed left and right. They're being stabbed, left to die in the creeks, being cut up and cut into pieces by these guys. And so it's pretty brutal. But if you stay in town and your town gets captured, this is what happened to you. One of the complaints that both sides had was there weren't enough trees. There weren't enough trees to hang people with. And so this is what you would have seen in Germany. It was trees full of people dangling from their necks as they're being hung in mass numbers. So this is where all those casualties come from. One of the things that we talk about when we deal with the military, and if you had World History 1, this was something that we talked a lot about, was what's the relationship of military to society? If you're interested in military history, it is an interesting kind of field, battles and commanders and technology and stuff like that. But if you're not interested in military history specifically, that's fine too, but you need to understand that the military plays an incredibly important role in social formation, okay? Now, when we get to this point in world history, one of the things that you would see was the nobility, these people born to wealth and power, had a great deal of political influence. They were the political class. Well, why is that? When you look throughout world history, in periods where this is the case, you would say, well, why is that? Well, one of the things that you can almost always pin on is the fact that, well, these are also the guys that are running the military. Well, how come you have all the political power, Sir Tuttle Butt, or whatever his name is, right? Well, I protect the area, I keep it safe. If it wasn't for me, the invaders would come in and they'd kill all you people. Oh, well, as long as that's true, okay, right? You may not totally agree with it, but at least you can kind of understand. What happens when you get to the point where that's not true anymore? Where the nobles, they don't really form the backbone of the defense force, okay? And that's what's going to take place here by the 1600s. Ever increasingly, armies were made up of foot soldiers who were ever increasingly becoming professional. It was getting easier and easier for the average person to be the one that is going out there and becoming the main force on the battlefield. Now, what you're going to see is, at the heart of this is, in part, technological changes, all right? And first you're going to see the pike holding back the horse, right? These cavalry charges of these heavy horsemen, these knights that were, of course, they were the nobility because they're the only ones that had the money to be able to afford the horses and the gear and the training and the retinue and stuff like that. Eventually you'll see the pike holding back the horse, and then these long-range weapons, first the archers, but then eventually cannons and musket fire in the hands of average peasants. They're the ones that are going to decide most of these battles. You no longer have a reliance on these nobles who have to have the money and they have to have the training, and it takes years and years to get good at, sort of fighting on the back of a horse, and then you can be the dominant sort of figure on a battlefield. You can just give a musket to some guy, right? And you can show him how to work it in just, he can get pretty good at it in just a few hours. And he can blow some knight off the back of a horse at 50 yards. Some knight charges at it, blam, he's dead. Boom, right? This is, on the one hand, kind of an interesting, that's a really interesting shift on the battlefield. But it's also going to call into question all of the social grid work that battlefield reality had put into place. So knights are no longer able to dominate the battlefield, and ever increasingly, the mounted forces are relegated to a secondary role, right? The knights only attack ever increasingly when the infantry had kind of resolved the main part of the battlefield. Now, this is what musketmen would have looked like here at this point in world history. Here you can see a pretty early kind of primitive one, right? The arquebus and some of the firelock weapons actually has a little shield and has a little holding ramp. And then these guys, these are Dutch musketmen, and they've got their aiming rod with them because the musket is pretty heavy, and so you'd set it on that to aim. And then here you can see ranks and ranks of these English musketeers marching in cohort with the pikemen. The pikemen were designed, these guys, as they go out, they got these sharp sort of pointed implements with these, most of the time, metal tips. And their job was to keep the horses back while the guys right behind them would fire over their heads or between their heads and their shoulders with the musket fire. And they could hit these guys at very long range, and ever increasingly, it's just these guys. Just people, just the average people that are coming to dominate the battlefield rather than the knights on horseback. And so here you can see some of these guys that are firing, what it would kind of look like on the battlefield. And of course the cannons at this point are relatively small and not nearly as effective as they would be later on or today. But they're still a pretty radical game changer on the battlefield in terms of being able to break up very large formations of enemies, but also in terms of siege operations. A walled city is no longer the protection that it used to be, because cannons can knock down walls very, very quickly as a result of this massive projectile that they can hurl at these guys. So this is going to help create this political situation. And so our next major topic is going to be absolutism, right? And this is a particular political theory that holds that a monarch, particularly the king at the top of this sort of pyramid hierarchical structure, should have absolute power. That you're not just a figurehead kind of thing. That, yeah, you wear the crown, and there's a couple of things that you can do. I mean, you can go out and talk to the people, and you can do some things. But, you know, the locals really do everything. They say, no, that's not how a monarch is supposed to work. That essentially a monarch is what you and I might refer to as a kind of a dictator, right? Where they have total political power or absolute political power. Now, one of the truisms that had been the case throughout much of the Middle Ages is monarchs wanted a lot of political power. But due to resistance from local authority, due to transportation and communication limitations of the Middle Ages, you just couldn't really have that. You just couldn't do what they wanted to do. Finally, ever increasingly, we will see that the monarchy had been able to establish itself much more firmly, and they were moving towards absolutism in a lot of places here in Europe. It's going to reach its zenith under the guy we're going to use as our case study, as our example, and that's France's Louis XIV. Now, I just want to apologize in advance that for the next several weeks, basically all the guys that we're going to be talking about as the kings of France are all going to be named Louis. Let me state very, very clearly, this is not my fault, okay? It's not my fault that France couldn't come up with a more original name for its monarchs than Louis. We're going to have Louis XIII, we're going to have Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI, all the way up to Louis XVII, and then I think we're even going to have like a Louis Philippe in the 1800s. It's not my fault, okay? I'm just the weatherman. I'm telling you it's going to rain. In this case, I'm just the historian. I tell you, they named all their guys Louis. So in your notes, if you just want to make, an annotation, this is number 13, number 14. That's what you're going to have to do. Don't get mad at me. I just don't want to see a whole lot of messages when they come in. It's like, oh, how come you call them all Louis? Because that's what their name was. So, not my fault. All right. So Louis's father, of course, Louis, right? He had relied on one of the major legates of the Catholic Church, right? Cardinal Richelieu. Right? Cardinal Richelieu, his concept of organization of a nation was on Christian boundaries, sort of God's at the head, and then the Pope's in there too, but the king should really be the top of the apex of this pyramid. And Richelieu was integral in making sure that the king had this power. Now Richelieu did some kind of shady stuff in order to make sure that none of the local people had power, and it was in fact the king had power. Richelieu sent spies out to spy on a lot of noble people that would potentially be plotting for more autonomy, and he, of course, called that treason. He had a lot of people thrown in jail. You didn't want to know, or you didn't want to find out that Richelieu was on your tail, because that meant that death or imprisonment may be not too far behind. All right. He also increased the central tax power of the monarchy. Right. Money is power in this regard. Right. And so the ability to be able to get the money to come in and to spend it on what you want. All right. Is going to be one of the ways that you can execute authority. We have to do what this guy said. Why? Because he has the money and we need the money. Right? He sent out legates of the church and of the government to make sure that the monarchy's will was executed at the local level. So you've got to permeate the government from top to bottom. You can't just send out these dictates from Paris and expect everybody to do it. You have to have people on the local level, and Richelieu made sure that they were populated by his men. Right? Well, Louis XIII is going to die. Right? He's going to leave the throne for his son Louis number 14. So again, I'm sorry, right? Well, Louis XIV is going to inherit this very highly centralized state. Now, Louis XIV was only 4 when he takes over the throne. So obviously, you're going to have a regency, and you're going to have a great deal of authority continue to be exercised by the other agents of the state. But once he assumed power, all right. Once he assumes power, he does very much buy into this idea that I should be an absolute monarch. I should have total and full power as the legitimate monarch. So it isn't just that, well, there was this absolutist state sort of waiting on him. That's an important part of the formula. There's also a great deal of will and direction by Louis XIV himself. He said, yeah, that's what I want. I, in fact, want to develop that ability. Right? So there's Louis XIV. We've got a bunch of pictures of him to look at. Very interesting. This is a point in world history where a man would be considered extremely sexy if he wore a great big wig, had sequins, pantyhose, and pumps. So anyway, and of course, all the pictures I've ever seen of Louis XIV is the dude is not attractive, not in the least. And so, and since it's a painting, you know that he's probably way uglier in real life. This is Louis XIV, right? This is he's being painted as his sort of conqueror pose. He's got his imperial baton, right? He's got his helmet, he's got his suit of armor, he's got his, I don't know what that is, a sash, sequins, the train of his dress, I don't know what the deal is with that. So anyway, this is him, and of course he's still got the ridiculous hair going on. And he even takes it to sort of the ultimate heights, where he's got himself painted as a Roman emperor, no lie, riding a horse. And just to take it to the extreme of absurdity, an angel of God is placing the wreath on his head, just in case you wondered, well, why is he in charge? Well, God wants me to be in charge. What makes you say that? Well, there was an angel. Of course, I'm kidding a little bit. But this gives you an idea of Louis and his concept of himself, right? Well, it shouldn't surprise us that Louis XIV is very quickly going to come to dominate basically all of the central policy-making machinery of the French state. And in order to do that, what you've got to do is you've got to push the people who are making the decisions either to the margins or push them away completely. And these other competitors for that power are, of course, going to be the local nobility and the church. The Roman Catholic Church was an important political player, and they had money, and they had land, and they had power. And Louis, especially the power, really, really wants these guys sort of pushed away. Now, one of the things that Louis is going to be able to dominate as his role in monarch is foreign policy, war fighting, and so when you have these periods in the strong central executive, they have to come to the fore just because that's the nature of command and control. And so as a result of that, Louis is able to absorb a lot of power among himself. All right? He is going to fight several wars to try to expand France's holdings in Europe. Generally speaking, he meets a kind of a mixed bag of how well he's going to do. He's going to win some, he's going to lose some. It's going to be kind of a wash in that regard, right? Louis is also going to be a big fan of economic expansion. Now, this is not in the same way that you and I, as citizens of a free nation, would hope that our government supports expansion of an economy. We would hope that the government does that because it allows us to have prosperity, it allows us to live free lives. Louis probably was not very interested in that at all. But Louis did understand that an expansion of the economic activity meant an expansion of the tax base. More people making money in his country by building roads, by building canals, by reducing taxes and tariffs, and so thus encouraging economic activity. That means more money for me. More money equals more power. But you are going to then have economic expansion. You're going to have infrastructural investment. You're going to have trade contact expansion. So this is going to be something that is going to be beneficial to all of France, but that wasn't its original purpose in terms of what Louis had sort of in mind. Now, Louis did not get everything that he wanted. Okay, he had a lot of trouble at the local level, particularly local officials that were resistant to central authority that still wanted to run things their own way. And of course, you can't string them all up. You can't just execute all these people. But generally speaking, Louis' France becomes the model for European absolutism. And you'll see that the best example of this is the social and political capital that Louis is going to build at Versailles, which is just outside Paris. It's this palace of the kings of France, and this is Versailles, right, with the gardens and the giant palace and with all these different places. And so, for those of you who have ever been to Versailles, you can't come away from it without being overawed because it's pretty cool, right? This is the front gate, the front entrance here to Versailles. How impressive it is! Where you've got the marble and you got the gold inlay and you got the tiling and you got all this kind of stuff. This is the fountain. They got the fountain off right at this point. But the reason I got it in here is not so much for the fountain and all the statuary, is this building in the background that you can see, and you go, wow, it's really fancy. Oh, is that where the guests stay? No, this is the servants' quarters. This is where, when you show up and you've got your guy that his job is to shine your boots, and the other guy is to make sure that he powders your underwear before you put it on, and the other person to do your hair so you look like Louis or whatever. You've got to bring a retinue of people to make sure that all your little knickknacks and stuff get done because, if you're a noble person, you don't do that kind of stuff yourself, right? This is where they stay. This is where the low-end people stay, okay? And as you take a tour, you see paintings and alabaster railings and columns and high-flown ceilings and arches and statues and inlay and teaking and tapestries and hooked rug work and, oh my goodness, mahogany and marble everywhere. It's just incredibly fancy, incredibly expensive, just ridiculously amazing. This is the Hall of Mirrors, where the whole wall is lined with Mirror is incredibly impressive. A number of important events would be here. The formation of the German Empire after the conquest of France in 1871 is going to take place here. The end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, following the First World War is going to take place here. So Versailles is going to be incredibly important even after the monarchy of France goes away. This is one of the fountains in operation, just to give you an idea of how impressive this is. Of course, Louis would bring these nobles in, and one of the ways that you can keep them from exercising authority at the local level is you invite them to Versailles. They get to hang out here, right? They romp around in the fountain, I don't know. But they're hanging out with you, and they're not back doing their stuff. They're not taking care of their local government, and so who is doing that? Well, it's you, right? You're Louis. You get to do this. And you can assume a lot more power. So this is a good way to socially distract a lot of these people. Well, if France is our example of absolutism, if you want to, it's our thesis of absolutism. England is going to be our antithesis. It's our counterexample of what's going to take place. And when we go through and we look at these guys here in the 16 and then on into the early 1700s, we're going to see a very different outplay. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be the trend towards absolutism. There is. The problem here is in England, there's going to be a reaction against it. There's going to be pushback, and that pushback is going to succeed, unlike in France. Well, long story short, the Tudors are going to die out as a dynasty in 1603. And that means that the Scottish Stuarts, the Stuart dynasty, they're going to come in. And they are much more friendly towards Catholicism. All right? When King Henry VIII had taken England out of the Catholic Church and made it the Anglican Church, he really didn't do a lot theologically. There really wasn't big changes. The Anglican Church looked pretty much like the Catholic Church. They just kind of took, they took Catholic off the letterhead and replaced it with Anglican, and they kind of called it a day. Well, a lot of people in England, though, took that shift much more seriously. And they said, wait a second, we're not Catholic anymore. We don't have to do what the Pope says. We don't have to accept Catholic doctrine on a lot of things that we disagree with. How about we make some real changes? One of these groups, of course, was the Puritans, right? And the Puritan movement inside England was a pretty big movement, but there were a lot of other groups. In fact, the 1500s, 1600s in England was sort of like going to Baskin Robbins and trying to get ice cream. And there's like 64 different flavors of ice cream. Which one do you want? You got the Puritans, but you also have the Ranters, the Ravers, the Rollers, the Levelers. There's just people all over the place. The Quakers, the Shakers, there's tons of these people. And the Puritans, though, had managed to get some people into some fairly important positions. And they're very wary of Charles Stuart, who's coming into the new monarch. Charles's slide to what they view towards Catholicism. All right. Now, Parliament, all right, was much more representative of sort of the Protestant sympathies of the people, and Parliament is attempting to flex its muscles as well. And they attempt to impose a lot more control over this situation and prevent Charles from just sort of reverting, coming back in, and essentially throwing everything back in reverse. If King Henry VIII can come in and say, hey, all right, we're not Catholic anymore, then what's to stop Charles to come back in and say, hey, guess what, we're Catholic again. This is something that Parliament, and of course a lot of people who had grown very, very used to being not Catholic, were pretty worried about. And so, what you're going to see is when Parliament attempts to do this, the king is just going to come in and he's going to arrest members of Parliament. You guys just can't vote against me. We can't have that. I'm the king, right? So this is an absolutist tendency, right? That the king should have absolute power. This Parliament, this body of whoever they are, right? They're trying to vote against you. That's not how it works. The king rules. Now, if I want to delegate some authority to Parliament to vote and debate and posture, like politicians do, that's cool, but they can't go against me. So when he goes in and he arrests these people, this is going to spark a rebellion. This is going to spark a civil war. The escaping members of Parliament and these other people that support them are going to get together their own forces to be able to oppose Charles's army. Now, the leader of Parliament's army is a guy named Oliver Cromwell, all right? And very long story short, Cromwell's a great general. He's a really powerful, smart, brilliant general, one of the great ones in English history. And they're going to wind up fighting these battles against the Stuarts. They're going to fight these battles against the king's forces. And bing, bang, boom, Cromwell's guys are going to win, okay? In fact, they go so far, not only do they win these battles, but they, in fact, in one of them, they capture the king. They capture Charles himself. But then things begin to fall apart for Parliament's side. What do? We've got control, we've got power, we've got the king. What do we do with him? What are we going to do? Who's in charge? Well, the king should be in charge. We can't put the king in charge. The king's a prisoner. So there's a real lack of sort of central control at this moment within Parliament's camp. Charles then basically says, okay, look, you guys need to let me go, and what I'll do is I'll arrange for you guys to have power, and we'll work out a deal, okay? You guys, if you want to institute a Presbyterian, state, you can do that if you want to. There were a lot of suggestions, sort of out there at this point. But they decide to let him go, which he doesn't do what he told them he was going to do. In fact, he escaped to try to get back to Scotland, where, of course, most of his family was from, to raise an army to try to come back to these guys. Again, that's what's going to happen. They're going to fight again, and Oliver Cromwell is going to make sure that the king is captured again. This time, though, in 1648, they're going to make sure that he doesn't get away because they're going to execute him. Now, there's an interesting thing about cutting off a king's head, and that is you can't uncut it off. You see, if you capture the king, if you capture a political leader, you say, okay, you're a prisoner now, and you decide later, we really don't feel good about that. Let's let him go. Let's put him back into power if we want to. You can do that. You can put the king back in charge. But once you kill him, you can't unkill him. And that's what's going to take place here in 1648. There are various artistic interpretations of what this may have looked like. But in all of them, you've got King Charles in one spot and King Charles's head. Really, there's kind of too much distance in between both of them. As a result of that. So, who is going to be in charge? Well, Cromwell is going to ascend to this power that really had been vacated with Charles's death. Right? He's going to take over as leader. And he is going to come in and he's going to tell Parliament, okay, what we need to do is we need to get rid of the idea of monarchy. The idea of hereditary monarchy is no good. We've got to get rid of that idea. And so, I'm going to be in charge, but monarchy isn't going to work. And so, Parliament is going to call him Lord Protector. So, he's not the king. Parliament is now beginning to flex its own muscles because we've gotten rid of a king, we don't have a king, and so we can start going towards what you and I might refer to as the ideas of democracy and equality. More people need to vote, more ideas come in. The problem with this is Cromwell himself now, the guy who had fought against the king, was ever increasingly sort of drifting along that absolutist track. And I want the Parliament to do this. Well, you can't go into Congress today and say, you guys should do this. Well, there's a lot of members of Congress, and they're not necessarily all going to agree with you. In fact, they may disagree with you. And he found it really, really hard to work with Parliament because they wouldn't do what he says. That's what legislative bodies are like. Okay? And so he decides to just dissolve the body. He just gets rid of Parliament. You guys go away, right? And he's going to rule England as basically a dictator for about 30 years. He's also going to invade Ireland. So for those of you who are Irish and are really bothered by me constantly talking about Oliver Cromwell, that's why. Well, Cromwell's going to die after this period, and the question is, well, who's going to take over? Well, Cromwell's kid, right? No, we abolished the idea of monarchy. The army is going to kind of run things for a while. We can have an army dictatorship. No, the English realize that this is a ridiculous system given what's going on. And so they reestablished the monarchy under Charles II, but with a pretty strong finger wag. Hey, you saw what happened to Charles. You don't want to die like he did, right? And so that's going to be the admonition. So this is an artist's rendition here of Oliver Cromwell. Oh, me? Oh, you want me to be the Lord Protector? What a surprise. It wasn't a surprise, okay? He knew they were going to do this, all right? This is not hard to figure out, all right? And again, like I said, for those of you who are Irish and don't like the fact that the English colonized Ireland, that took place under Cromwell. And this is an Irish town being bombarded by English artillery under the auspices of Cromwell. Now, Charles II would, for the most part, behave himself. He decided not to really push Parliament's buttons. But what that meant was Parliament is growing in power while the monarchy is decreasing in power. When Charles dies, he leaves the throne to his son, James II. All right? James II is a Catholic. Bah! We can't have that. We can't have that. We're a Protestant nation. We've been Protestant for a long, long time now. We don't want to be a Catholic. But wait, hang on. James is old. James II was an old guy pretty much by the time he was ready to be the king. And this isn't going to be too much problem. We'll put up with him for a little while because the people that are going to take over it's got to be one of his daughters, right? One of his daughters, and they're Protestant. They had married Protestant guys, and so we'll put up with this brief little Catholic interlude, and it'll be cool, It'll be all right. All right, because eventually we'll get this. Because the law was, as the firstborn male would inherit the throne, would inherit the monarchy. But if you weren't able to produce a male heir, then it would go to one of the females. Oopsie, James II suddenly produced a male heir. Right? So naturally he's going to be Catholic, married another Catholic noble woman, and so now you've got the potentiality of a Catholic dynasty where you're going to have Charles II is Catholic, right? Or James II is Catholic, and then his heir is going to be Catholic, and so, oh boy, right? So what's going to happen here is these English nobility are going to start conspiring here against James, and they're going to get with one of James's daughters, right? And she had married a guy named William of Orange in what is now Belgium, and they basically said, hey, you should be legitimately the monarch, and your husband, we'll make him the king, but what you got to do is you got to invade England, but don't worry, we'll help you, right? We'll make sure that the king doesn't have any forces to prevent you, all right? This is often referred to as the Glorious Revolution, right? They're going to do that. They would invade the island, and there's essentially no fighting. I mean, there's a little bit, but I mean, really none, right? That's what's called the Glorious Revolution, because they come in, they chase off these forces of the Catholic monarchy, and so William of Orange becomes the king, King William, the whatever. And so, anyway, Parliament decided, though, here, very early on, here in 1705, to make sure it was really, really clear, hey, bro, right, you're not in charge. You're not an absolute monarch. You've got to deal with the idea that you're going to have some power, okay? But Parliament has some power, and that's just how things are going to be. England, in a lot of ways, really by this point, had become a constitutional monarchy. The king is going to have some power. The king's going to have some authority. But there's a limit. And then the Parliament is going to have some power. Okay? Now, as we'll see when we get to the 1800s, ever increasingly, especially with the sort of the latter half of Victoria's reign, for the most part, Parliament is going to be ever increasing its power, and the monarchy is going to be receding down to eventually we get today, where the monarchy in England is just, their job is to wave. Right? I mean, they're kind of figureheads. They do some things kind of behind the scenes, but in terms of official political power, they don't have some. So this is the Declaration of Rights. They're letting William know what the deal is. Hey, you're the king, but not an absolute monarch. And so when we look at what's going on here in the 1600s, and then I'll get on into the 1700s, politically and socially, right? Central Europe is really prostrated by the 30 Years' War. There's a lot of devastation as a result of that, right? Religion and monarchy had combined into a pretty deadly brew, right? They created chaos and death, and not peace and not order, like a lot of people had hoped at the beginning of the century, right? Europe, though, did dominate much of the world, although it was by economics and by force. Really by force at this point, right? Absolutism in France is a rising power, right? Kings of Europe are growing more and more powerful, but when you look at the opposite example of this, England had developed a constitutional monarchy, but had to endure a pretty bad civil war in the 1640s to do so, right? The individual, though, is beginning to become one of these major factors in Western thought, and this is going to be one of the major ideas that we're going to talk about as we deal with the history of ideas in the next several sections.